We are live.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March 2022 meeting of the ICOC and the Application Review Subcommittee. Maria, will you please call the roll?
Aisha Abdullah.
Yes.
Mohammed Abusalam.
Yes.
Kim Barrett.
Present.
Dan Bernal. George Blumenthal.
Here.
Linda Boxer.
Present.
Michael Botchin.
Here.
Leander Clark Harvey.
Present.
Anne Marie Dulege.
Present.
Isabel Dudon. Mark Fisher Colbury. Fred Fisher.
Here.
Elena Flowers.
Present.
Judy Gasson.
Here.
Larry Goldstein.
Here.
David Higgins.
Here.
Steve Julesgard. Rich Lahara.
Here.
Pat Levitt.
Here.
David Lowe.
Here.
Linda Malkus.
Here.
Dave Martin.
Here.
Shlomo Melmet.
Here.
Christine Miskowski.
Morning.
Lauren Miller Rogan.
Here.
Adriana Padilla.
Here.
Joe Panetta.
Here.
Al Roulette.
Here.
Barry Selleck.
Here.
Marvin Southard.
Here.
Michael Stamos. Jonathan
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
Thank you, Michael. Jonathan Thomas. Art Torres.
Aquí.
Christina Viori. Carol Watson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So I would like to start off by noting that for the first time in a long time, we now have a full complement of board members. All 35 slots are full, and towards that end, we have our two newest board members joining us this morning. They are Mohammed Abusalam and Marv Southard, and I've asked each of them to give a brief introduction to the board to tell them a little bit about themselves. So Mohammed, could you start, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for your welcome. Yes, I'm Mohammed Abusalam, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Innovation at San Jose State University. And as you all probably know, the CSUs are known to deliver excellent undergraduate and graduate education to the most ethnically, economically, and academically diverse student body in the nation. I've got a mixed background of technology development, program management, research administration, and intellectual property management at different levels, both in industry and in academia. And I look forward to bringing this expertise to help support this very important program and help deliver cures to all Californians with unmet medical needs. Thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Mohammed. And just like to point out for the board, this his ascension to the board is a watershed moment for us. It's the first Cal State representative we've had in the board's history. So we're delighted to have you. Thank you very much, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Marv, if you could go now, please.
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation to participate. In some ways, looking at your faces in the board, it's kind of like a recap of various parts of my life as I see people I recognize from my very early days. I began my career as running a substance abuse program in the San Joaquin Valley. Then I went back school at UCLA, got my PhD, worked in East LA for a number of years running a mental health program. Then I was hired to be the behavioral health director in Kern County, Bakersfield, and then I went on to be promoted, or anyway, roped into becoming the mental health director in LA County. And I was a LA County mental health director for 17 years. And when I finished with that, I was a professor practice at USC for 3 years or so and started a online DSW program and a veterans program there. And then I really retired in 2019. And then since then, it seems like my life has been spent Zooming.
you and all the rest of us, Marv. So welcome aboard. Thank you. And again, we're so happy to have both of you join this august group. And I know you'll find this to be a very interesting and worthwhile endeavor. Okay, so we're going to take a couple things out of order here. We're going to go to the voting items first, then circle back to President's report, the AAWG report, and the chair's report towards the tail end. So first we have our consent calendar. Are there any items on the consent calendar that anybody wishes to remove for individual consideration?
I just had a question about one of the items and I submitted that to staff. I don't need to take the time during the meeting, but I did have a question about one of the consent items.
Okay, did you get a response, Fred?
Not yet.
Okay, do you wish to pull that out to discuss, or you'll just sort of handle that offline?
I'll handle it offline.
Okay, thank you. So do we hear a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Thank you, Marv. Is there a second?
Second.
Maria, yep, I guess we should call the roll even though they're consent items. So please do call the roll.
Who was the second? I didn't catch that.
Oh, it was me, George Blumenthal.
Oh, thank you, George. Okay. Haifa Abdullah,
Yes.
Mohammed Abu Salam,
I'm going to have to abstain on items 5 and 6 since I was not available at those meetings, but on the rest of the agenda, yes.
thank you. Kim Barrett,
Yes.
Dan Bernal, George Blumenthal,
Yes.
Linda Boxer,
Yes.
Michael Bacci,
Yes.
Leandra Clark Harvey,
Yes.
Anne Marie Dulege,
Yes.
Isabel Dudon, Mark Fisher Colbury, Fred Fisher,
Yes.
Elena Flowers. Elena, you're on mute. Elena? Okay,
Sorry about that. Yes, my mouse died.
thank you. Thank you. Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein,
Yes.
David Higgins,
Yes.
Steve Julesgard, Rich Lahara,
Yes.
Pat Levitt,
Yes.
David Lowe,
Yes.
Linda Malkus,
Yes.
Dave Martin,
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed,
Yes.
Chris Miskowski,
Yes.
Lauren Miller-Rogan,
Yes.
Adriana Padilla,
Yes.
Joe Panetta,
Yes.
Al Rolette,
Yes.
Barry Selleck,
Yes.
Marvin Southard,
Yes.
Michael Stamos,
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres,
Aye.
Christina Bori, Carol Watson.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you very much. We're going to move now to the application review subcommittee part of the meeting for action item number 9, which is consideration of applications submitted in response to clinical trial stage projects program announcement CLINS 1, 2, or 3. Dr. Sombrano will present. Gil?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give me a second to share my screen. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. So today I'm presenting to you the recommendations from the Grants Working Group for the latest round of our clinical program. And as we begin both this item and our meeting, just a reminder to us as we move forward, as well as to everyone listening, about our mission that drives and guides what we do, which is to accelerate world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. Our clinical stage programs have various funding opportunities, particularly the CLIN 1 and CLIN 2. The CLIN 1 is focused on supporting late-stage preclinical projects or IND enabling work. And so the application that we're considering today is a CLIN 1. We also have opportunities for supporting clinical trials themselves. But in this case, it's an earlier stage proposal. This is a reminder of what our budget status looks like currently. We have an annual allocation for the fiscal year 21-22 of $162 million for the clinical program. We have just over $65 million that have been committed by the board to projects that you have seen and approved. Today's proposal is for an additional $5 million, and if it is approved, then that would leave a balance of almost $92 million for this fiscal year up until June. The grants working group, when they review these applications, use a scoring system of 1, 2, and 3. So anything that receives a score of 1 means that it has exceptional merit and warrants funding. A score of 2 means it needs improvement, and those typically go back for the applicant to revise and resubmit for then the grants working group to take a second look at it. And then those that receive a score of 3 means that they're sufficiently flawed that they don't warrant funding at this time. The criteria upon which they base that score are guided by these 5 questions. Does the project hold the necessary significance and potential for impact? Meaning, does it offer a good value proposition, and is it worth doing? Does it have a good rationale? Is it well planned and designed? Is it feasible, including whether they have the appropriate resources and qualified team to conduct the work? And then lastly, does the project address the needs of underserved communities? The grants working group itself is composed of both scientific members as well as patient advocate and nurse members from this board. And so the scientific members are responsible for the scientific evaluation. And so we have experts in particular disease areas who have both clinical and scientific background, those that have regulatory expertise in manufacturing and product development. And so the score of 1, 2, 3 that you see will be given by these scientific members. Our patient advocate and nurse members also have a role in the grants working group to conduct the DEI evaluation. And so you will see a DEI score that ranges from 0 to 10 that's given by our board members. They also provide the patient perspective on the overall significance and potential impact of these projects, and also provide oversight on the process. So at the end of every review, the patient advocate nurse members vote on whether they felt the review was conducted in a fair and unbiased manner. In addition to those 2 groups, we also fill in knowledge and expertise gaps with scientific specialists. And so these are non-voting members who come in to participate in maybe 1 or 2 applications and provide their expertise that then the panel takes into account when doing their scoring and evaluation. All right, so the clinical proposal that we are bringing to you today is CLIN 1 12946. This is entitled Skin Regeneration and Wound Healing with a Topical BRAF Inhibitor. So the therapy is a small molecule that acts as an inhibitor of BRAF, which is a signaling molecule in cells. The indication is for venous leg ulcers, and the goal is to complete IND enabling studies and submit an IND to the FDA. And so the funds requested are just over $5 million for this project. A little background on this indication. So venous leg ulcers are sores that occur on the leg and that develop from suboptimal blood flow. They're very slow to heal. They can last weeks and sometimes years in some patients. So the value proposition of this proposal is as follows. The current standard of care is really mostly managing the wound. And so there's compression bandaging and stockings to try to improve blood circulation and allow the wounds to heal, but there is no topical or systemic drug available that would aid that healing process. So if this project were to be successful, the proposed therapy would provide a very easy to administer topical drug treatment that could accelerate healing. And so why is this a stem cell or gene therapy project? So this therapeutic candidate small molecule acts on epidermal stem cells in order to activate the wound healing process. So we usually provide you a little background both on what's in our portfolio that might be similar, as well as other projects that they've done. So we don't have anything currently in our active clinical portfolio that targets this disease indication or anything similar. Previous CIRM funding to the applicant team, this team has received CIRM awards in the past, which have focused on treating melanoma or developing therapies for melanoma in both projects which were preclinical and clinical in nature. They achieved their milestones as expected, and so there were no issues in previous funded work for this team. So here are here's a summary of the recommendations from the grants working group. The score of 1 was rendered with 12 votes from the grants working group member. There were 2 members that gave it a score of 2 and none that gave it a score of 3. The DEI score for this application is a 7. And the CIRM team recommendation is to fund this application in agreement with the grants working group for an award amount of just over $5 million. And that is my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gil. Again, for members of the board, this is an application review subcommittee item. Are there any questions or well, first of all, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved. This is Al Rolla.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Al and Anne Marie. Questions or comments from members of the board?
Got a question, JT?
Yes, Joe.
Thank you. This sounds like a very promising, possibly more general type of therapy that could expand beyond this indication. So, I totally support it, but I just wanted to ask Gil if there's, it sounds so interesting, if there's any indication that it could potentially be used beyond this application.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the intent of the applicants is to expand it beyond this particular indication, but guidance from the FDA in terms of developing and testing the product was to first select an indication. They felt that the venous leg ulcers was the most appropriate to start with, but they could expand it to other wound types and ulcers if they are successful with it.
This is Dave Martin. In the previous investment by CIRM, was that for the same inhibitor?
No, I believe it was not. I think that was a different therapeutic candidate for melanoma treatment. Okay. Although a BRAF inhibitor is also used for melanoma treatment.
Right.
Haifa has her hand raised.
Dr. Abdullah?
Was this drug or compound studied on humans before? And do we have any preliminary results on that?
So I believe this has been tested in humans, not for this indication, but for melanoma treatment and for other indications. So in this case, I think this is resulting from an observation that in the treatment of melanoma, there has been the observation of skin augmentation and growth, which clued the team into the idea that this could actually be used for wound healing and skin regeneration.
Is it an oral medication or a topical medication?
So it can be used systemically, but the intent here is to use it as a topical gel for the wound healing.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments by members of the board? Seeing none, any comments from members of the public? Maria, do we have any public comments?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Then will you please call the roll?
Yes. Dan Bernal. Anne Marie Dulege.
Yes.
Isabel Dudon. Mark Fisher Colbury.
Yes.
Fred Fisher.
Yes.
Elena Flowers.
Yes.
Leandra Clark Harvey.
Yes.
David Higgins.
Yes.
Steve Julesgard. Rich Lahara. I'm sorry, Rich.
Yes.
Thank you. Dave Martin.
Yes.
Christine Miskowski.
Yes.
Lauren Miller-Rogan.
Yes.
Adriana Padilla.
Yes.
Joe Panetta.
Yes.
Al Roulette.
Yes.
Marvin Southard.
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Maria, I did not hear my name.
This is for the application review subcommittee portion of the meeting. So we just called the voting members of that subcommittee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. That concludes the application review subcommittee portion of the meeting. We're going to continue on here to item 10. As you all know, we have in the past had a number of different discovery categories that we have funded over the years. And today we are going to discuss and put up for your consideration a new category. So this item is consideration of concept plan for discovery stage research projects DISC 0. This will be Dr. Canet Aviles will present. Rosa.
Just realized you couldn't hear me. Mr. Chairman, members of the board. 1 second. There you go. On behalf of our team at CIRM, today I'm presenting a new concept that we are bringing to you for approval. This concept is part of the discovery pillar of programs. This new concept is framed in the context of our mission, as my colleague Dr. Zambrano reminded us a few minutes ago. Our mission is to accelerate world-class science, to deliver transformative, 1 second. There's a bit of feedback. I don't know if there's any way to lower that. Maybe, JT, could you mute yourself? Perhaps that will help. Thank you. To deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and the world. As we know, despite the progress in regenerative medicine over the past decade, there are still critical gaps in our understanding of fundamental human cell biology and disease mechanisms that affect the pace of scientific discovery and prevent the potential of this research from being fully realized as a basis for new therapies and as tools for biomedical innovation. The new era of technological innovation in gene editing, single-cell profiling, data science, and engineering is presenting new opportunities to us for addressing questions of biology that have remained elusive over these years. And all this work led to the new strategic plan and a new and revised mission statement reflecting the new era that we are in. CIRM is seeking to harness these and other synergies through the Discovery Zero Foundation of Works. mechanism to foster a robust discovery engine that will not only open new doors to treatments, but also accelerate and increase the likelihood of bringing regenerative medicine treatments to patients in need. By incorporating principles and practices of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the science, this program also strives to foster discoveries that will equitably impact patients in all our communities. CIRM has established, as we know, a strong track record for strategic investments in these 5 pillars, the infrastructure, education, discovery, translational, and clinical research. And through CIRM's new strategic plan, we will enhance, organize, and interconnect CIRM's proven funding model to achieve the overarching goals of delivering our mission. Today's concept is actually presented within the context of the discovery pillar. As a bit of background, the D0 concept has been informed by multiple layers of stakeholder discussion. And actually, there's a blog that our colleague Mitra Hushman posted in the context of when we were developing the CIRM CNS Consortium workshop that actually summarizes very well all these stakeholder meetings and what the outcome was. But in the context of today's discussion, these discussions gathered input that started even prior to the passage of Proposition 14. And these include the brainstorming neurodegeneration workshop that was celebrated in 2019 and the strategic scientific advisory panel that happened in 2021. Through all these meetings, CIRM received broad stakeholder input around some common threats, namely the need for continued research of basic mechanisms of stem cell biology, gene therapy approaches, and disease biology to improve the likelihood of clinical success for regenerative therapies. This translated into the strategic plan that was approved by you back in December of last year, that is for the next 5 years. And to realize the full potential of regenerative medicine for society, CIRM is committed to develop high-risk and high-reward type of projects, to fund high-risk, high-reward type of projects. The objective of the D0 Foundation Awards is to support rigorous studies addressing critical basic knowledge gaps in the biology of stem cells and regenerative medicine approaches, and to advance stem cell-based tools. Projects that will be funded through the foundational awards should propose impactful or innovative research that culminates in a discovery or technology that could either advance our understanding of the biology of a stem cell biology that is relevant to human biology and disease, or advance the development or use of human stem cells as tools for biomedical innovation, or lead to the greater applicability of regenerative medicine discoveries to communities representing the full spectrum of diversity, or ultimately advance the application of genetic research that is relevant to human biology and disease as it pertains to stem cells and regenerative medicine. In terms of eligibility, these D0 eligible projects will define and propose research that addresses a key knowledge gap in our understanding of biology or application of stem cells or progenitor cells, or in the application of genetic research as it pertains to stem cells or regenerative medicine. For the scope of this solicitation, and this is actually very well defined in the concept that was provided as materials for this meeting, CIRM considers genetic research to mean research that alters genomic sequences of cells, or that introduces or directly manipulates nucleic acids in cells. While we do include research on animals and animal cells, we require that discoveries made in non-human cells be validated with a relevant human cell equivalent as part of the proposed project. The institutional eligibility is, institutions that are eligible will be California for-profit and non-profits are eligible to apply, and the principal investigators must commit at least 20% effort. And of course, more granularity on this eligibility elements is provided through the concept and will be provided in the program announcement, if approved. Now, consistent with the strategic plan to leverage collective scientific knowledge to inspire a collaborative research that addresses Californians' unmet medical needs, if the board approves this concept, in the application, we are planning to incorporate guidelines for the development and execution of a data sharing and management plan with the goal of effectively capture scientific knowledge and enable collaborative research. Importantly, these guidelines and templates are there to support applicants, and I want to strengthen or reinforce this statement. They are there to support and help our applicants in the development of successful research projects and maximize the collaborative potential of all of CIRM-funded research. We are also planning to provide guidelines in those guidelines for allocation of funds for the personnel and or activities related to managing and sharing the data. And also for the data sharing and management plan, applicants will also be required to adhere to fair data sharing principles of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data for scientific research and therapy development. Finally, in terms of the budget, CIRM will fund direct project costs of up to $1 million per award for up to 3 years in duration. Of note, we have chosen to provide the direct cost in this slide. For indirect costs, the cost per project averages approximately $1.5 million for 3 years. And this opportunity could be available 1 to 2 times per year. An initial estimate based on previous basic and discovery pillar programs leads us to estimate an approximate of 12 to 14 awards per cycle, with an estimate of about $20 million per round. Finally, I would like to ask the board for approval for the DCERO Foundational Awards Program concept as we presented today to you. Thank you.
Mute.
Got to unmute myself there. Thank you, Rosa, for a very well thought out and articulated plan for this new program, which, if adopted by the board, will further flesh out the menu of funding options that we have across the research continuum. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Martin.
Yeah, I second Mike Botchin.
Okay, Maria, did you get that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Yes.
George Blumenthal has his hand raised.
George.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a quick comment and a quick question. My quick comment is one of great support. I think it's really important for the long-term success of CIRM to make the kind of basic science advances that this program will entail. If we want to keep the pipeline going of developing clinical trials down the line, we really need to develop new ideas in science and develop new opportunities there as well. So I see this as part of a thriving ecosystem of scientific advancement. So I'm very supportive of this. My quick question has to do with the fact that this is, of course, like many, perhaps all CIRM grants, open to both public and for-profit institutions. Do we have a sense in the past of, for discovery grants, what the percentage of those that went to for-profit institutions was?
I could need to ask my colleague Gil or Jen Lewis.
So no, that's a great question. The percentage is low, and it's based on the number of applicants that we get. So for very early stage programs, the number of applicants is maybe at about 5% of all applicants. So it's relatively low.
Okay, thank you.
And that, George, just to put in context, obviously the further you get along, the more likely you are to have industry involvement. And we're now seeing on the CLIN awards, for example, Gil, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're sort of approaching 50-50 industry to academia. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. As one goes along the development pipeline, we see much more participation by for-profit companies, particularly in the clinical program.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Gil.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from members of the board? Mohammed.
Thank you, JT. First comment, I really like the program and I support it, and I agree with George's comments earlier about the value of bringing in basic research to the portfolio. I just have one question, especially that this is supporting also for-profit companies. Have you considered cost sharing or cost matching requirement for funding these projects?
I will defer to Gil, but we have not, although there is not for the D0. But Gil, could you like to, somebody's sharing their screen. That's, I don't know who's sharing their screen, but we can see the links, the notes. Okay. Gil, could you like to?
Sure. So at early stages, we don't require what we call co-funding in projects, just because we feel that very early on we want to provide as much support to have these projects develop. As we get later stages, beginning with translational, we begin asking for profits for a 20% co-funding amount, and it increases as you go up to a phase 3 trial, which goes up to 50%. So early on, we don't.
Clear, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Seeing none, any comments from members of the public?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Maria, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Haifa Abdullah.
Yes.
Mohammed Abusalam.
Yes.
Kim Barrett.
Yes.
George Blumenthal.
Yes.
Linda Boxer.
Yes.
Michael Botchin.
Yes.
Leandra Clark Harvey.
Yes.
Anne-Marie Dulege.
Yes.
Isabel Dudon, Mark Fisher Colbury.
Yeah.
Fred Fisher.
Yes.
Elena Flowers.
Yes.
Judy Gasson.
Yes.
Larry Goldstein.
Yes.
David Higgins.
Yes.
Steve Julesgard. Rich Lahara.
Yes.
Pat Levitt.
Yes.
David Lowe.
Yes.
Linda Malkus.
Yes.
Dave Martin.
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed.
Yes.
Christine Miaskowski.
Yes.
Lauren Miller Rogan.
Yes.
Adriana Padilla.
Yes.
Joe Panetta.
Yes.
Al Rolette.
Yes.
Barry Selleck.
Yes.
Marvin Southard.
Yes.
Michael Stamos.
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas.
Yes.
Art Torres.
Aye.
Christina Vori. Carol Watson.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you, Maria, and congrats, Rosa. This is an excellent addition to the CIRM set of programs, and we look forward avidly to its launch. And thank you for all your hard work, you and your team, in putting this concept together.
David, you keep sharing your screen. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go now on to item number 11. Consideration of amendments to concept plans for discovery, translation, and clinical stage research projects. Dr. Sambrano will present. Gil.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm presenting to you some updates as we do periodically to our recurring funding opportunities. And I just want to put this slide up just to remind you of what we're talking about. So we have our core funding opportunities that happen on a regular basis throughout the year. So we offer our discovery opportunities twice a year, translation twice a year, and clinical 12 times per year. And there are several opportunities that fall under each. And so as we gain experience with these programs, we often see improvements and tweaks that we need to make. And in particular, as we have begun moving forward under Prop 14, there are several that we wanted to highlight in particular. So I'm going to start with changes to the DISC-2 concept. So also, by the way, the specific changes are tracked in documents that were provided to you, so you can see the detail of what the proposed changes are. And so what I'm doing here in this slide is just summarizing what they are. So I'll start with the DISC-2. And so DISC-2 is our funding opportunity for applicants to develop a therapeutic candidate or another product candidate type before getting into translational study. So these are the earliest of that pipeline development. And so what we are proposing here is that we change the duration of the award from 2 years to 3 years for those that are proposing a therapeutic candidate. We have found that particularly for those in the neuroscience arena, it really does require more than the 24 months that are currently allowed to develop and characterize a candidate appropriately, particularly the long-term animal studies that are conducted in many of these proposals. So we are proposing that. And in conjunction with that is to increase the budget that is allowed from the current 900,000 to 1.5 million for the direct project costs to account both for the increase in time as well as to make an adjustment generally to the increase in costs as they relate to stipends and salaries for students and postdocs and faculty. So that adjustments would be made with the increase to 1.5 million. We're also proposing that in addition to the adjustment in the budget, that we create an opportunity for an additional 200,000 that may be requested by the applicants if they provide justification for very specific activities. And in this case, it's activities that relate to obtaining or sharing development compatible lines, testing multiple cell lines to ensure the quality of the development candidate they're doing, and also to address scientific diversity of the lines that investigators are working with. You may recall that during our COVID opportunity, it came up quite often that some investigators were focused on trying to test and develop a candidate based on data from a single line, which in many cases didn't represent or offer much diversity in terms of race or background from where those lines were derived. So this might both function as an incentive to increase the diversity of lines that are studied and also enhance the projects overall. So that's the DISC-2 change. There's a change that encompasses both the DISC-2 as well as our translational program. And this is just a very simple change in terms of time to award launch. So we have kind of gone back and forth a little bit in the time from when the board approves an award till the time it gets launched. It is the time which we spend negotiating with the applicant to finalize the contract, make sure that their milestones are in place, and make any adjustments that are needed to the award amounts to account for allowable costs and so on. And so this process, we were able to reduce down to 30 days very quickly when we did the COVID program, but that was just not sustainable. And we've attempted to make it as short as possible. We feel at this point that 90 days is probably the best and most comfortable window for us to work with. So that is what we were proposing here for the translational and discovery programs. The main change to the clinical 2 concept, so this is for the opportunity that supports clinical trials. The change here is in the basis for determining what the maximum award and co-funding amounts are. So in the past, we have been using the, whether they're coming in as a phase 1, a phase 2, or phase 3 trial as the basis for determining those amounts. We have learned, however, that a phase 1, 2, and 3 are not as straightforward as we initially may have thought. There are combination trials and some trials that we believe really are a phase 2 that some declare to be a phase 1, and so on. And because of the differences in award amounts and co-funding requirements, it may also steer applicants to try to make their proposal fit into something that it quite doesn't. So we wanted to simplify this approach and just create 2 categories. The first is having a first-in-human study. And so that would be equivalent to what we currently support as a phase 1, with an award maximum of 12 million for nonprofits, 8 million for for-profits, and the co-funding of none for academics and 30% for for-profits. And then the second category would be everything that follows. So any succeeding studies to a first-in-human study would then adopt what we currently have as our phase 2 rate, which is an award maximum allowance of up to 15 million for both nonprofit and for-profit, and a co-funding amount of 40%, again, for both nonprofit and for-profit. Excuse me. So that's the proposed change for CLIN 2. For CLIN 1, this is just an addition of language that already exists for translational and clinical proposals. So this is more of a consistency issue that we want to just resolve in the concept and in the program announcement to make sure that the adoption of the allogeneic donor cell eligibility requirements are found in all of the concepts in a consistent manner. In addition, we are upgrading, if you will, our data sharing plan requirements a bit by making the data sharing itself a requirement. So this is a tweak in the language. Currently, the language encourages and or strongly encourages and or expects. We are tweaking the language to make it stronger so that we can follow up with a better plan to support applicants in sharing their data and really making it something that applicants coming into CIRM and accepting funding know that this is something that they should be doing. So we're making that change across all of these, and it follows suit to what was mentioned for the DISC 0 program as well. We have some slightly updated DEI language. We are continuing to work on developing and improving what the application looks like, and also to better reflect the board feedback that we have gotten on how to better evaluate that. So those changes in the application and everything else as it relates to DEI are in process and coming. And so we wanted to reflect some of that in the concept language as well. Oh, sorry, went too fast, sorry. The other thing that we're doing here throughout these concept documents is removing some expired references to CIRM 2.0, streamlining the format, overall trying to make it easier to read these concept templates and align them with language that exists in the respective program announcements. And so one of the examples of that consistency is with eligible candidates. And so for example, we had an allowance for minimally manipulated bone marrow, cord blood, and unmodified HSC in TRAN, which was disallowed, but is allowed in discovery and clinical. So that kind of inconsistency is something we're trying to resolve. So now we're allowing the minimally manipulated candidates across all of them in the same manner. So the other item that perhaps is inconsistent now that we have the DISC-0 concept moving forward is our definition and alignment of genetic research definition. So for all of these DISC, TRAN, and CLIN concepts, we have been using a definition which was adopted early on, and I'll show you in this slide, for gene therapy. Before Prop 14 came into being, we decided to delve into gene therapy to some extent and support it as a vital research opportunity. And so the gene therapy definition is shown here. But the new definition for DISC-0, or genetic therapy as we're calling it, is a bit broader. And the main difference is that it introduces the idea of including nucleic acids more generally, rather than just genes. So to include opportunities for mRNA technologies, antisense oligos that can be introduced into cells or that can manipulate gene expression in cells. So it would broaden the scope of what we would do. And so the proposal, this was discussed during our presentation at the Science Subcommittee of the board. And so their recommendation was to propose this broadened definition for adoption consistently across all of our proposals, so that, across all our concepts. So we have included that change in the concepts that are proposed to you currently. And so we are happy to take any questions or any follow-up discussion on that. So that summarizes the changes that are being proposed, and we are seeking your approval for adoption of these updates to the concepts. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gil, and thank you and team again for proposing these changes. It just as you know, through time, programs and needs and definitions and technology change. We have always done an excellent job of keeping up and refining what we do, and this is just the latest example. Do we have questions or comments from members of the board? Dave.
Gil, one of the questions in item number 2 of genetic research, would that include simply modifying the expression of, for instance, a gene, mRNA? I mean, you mentioned that, but for instance, epigenetic change that is not a genetic change, just expression change. How would that? Is it clear that that would be included?
Yeah, so a lot of the epigenetic approaches involve the manipulation of nucleic acids in one way or another. So I think as a result, they would qualify. So I think when we've explored that question, most of the projects that we thought of would qualify as a CIRM project.
Yeah, I just want to make certain that that is clear to potential applicants, that and so maybe it may take a little massage there.
Sure, thank you. We can also, I think, maybe provide examples as by way of that. That may be helpful as well.
Thank you, Dave. Barry.
Thanks, JT. I think directionally, all of the recommendations are spot on. In particular, I just wanted to comment on the increase to the amounts permitted for the discovery stage projects. You know, for those of you not familiar with the cost of drug discovery, even increasing that to 1.5 million is still relatively modest. I mean, just depending upon the actual indication that you're targeting in the route of administration, the cost of doing the so-called IND enabling studies and the manufacture of the drug for administration to humans can easily exceed $1.5 million. And so, you know, I'm highly supportive of that increase and suspect and would go so far as to predict that at some point in the future, we will likely come back and increase that even higher, but totally supportive of all of the recommendations that are being made.
Thank you, Barry. Fred?
Thanks. Gil, I didn't see it in the materials, but I may have misheard something you said in connection to in the TRAN work, including diverse or including cell lines from diverse communities. Did I hear that correctly or no?
Well, so that this was for the discovery too. It is for an allowance to of up to 200,000 to include additional cell lines for study, which may include diversifying the cell lines that are represented in those studies.
So I'm interested to hear from the scientists on the board of whether diversity within the cell line population in a study would enhance or potentially complicate the outcomes, because I'm not sure that we know at the sort of stem cell level whether ethnic differences really reveal themselves in that way, and whether that's a value add, you know, to the research. I know our DEI focus has been focused on access, but it's unclear to me how much is really understood about diversity at the cellular level and how that comes into play in opening that up and potentially complicating results. Anyway.
No, but that's a good point, and I just want to clarify that the allowance is to allow the use of multiple lines. So there are many contexts. You know, if somebody is proposing an autologous therapy, for example, knowing that as they develop the candidate, that changing a gene in one cell versus another is going to be reproducible and the same. And so in order to allow for those kinds of studies to happen, we're creating this additional allowance. But one of the reasons that they could use it, it may not be the sole one, could also be to increase the diversity of the lines that are tested, meaning that in terms of racial ethnic background, you also have representation among the lines. But I think to your question, you know, the value of that may depend on, you know, the specific study, what they're doing at that early stage.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fred. We've got Mohammed next.
Thank you, JT. Gil, I find these requests are sensible, and I actually appreciate the flexibility of the programs to adapt to the scientific and operational evolution of these activities. The question I have is if you can speak to the process you go through to arrive at these kinds of modifications to the programs, and specifically, do you consult with past applicants or prospective applicants on what works operationally or what is needed, or at least do you validate these changes with these past or prospective applicants?
So that's a great question. You know, it depends on what the change is. So in some cases, yes, a lot of it is experience when we're managing subsequent to an award, the project, and we, you know, see what the consequences of what rules we put in place may be. I think part of it is also just that we notice a lack of clarity, and I think, and I hope that a lot of the changes we're making here are making things more consistent and clear. We want to make sure that somebody who comes into discovery, who then has a certain set of expectations of what qualifies, can go on to then the next stage of translation, and will generally have the same expectations for what qualifies and isn't suddenly thrown out because of inconsistencies in language. So a lot of it is driven through that experience of, as we begin to see applications come in, what tends to happen, and we take note of those things, and we have a list of items that we start to compile of what needs to be changed. The extent to which we do that outreach to applicants is just going to really depend on how much we feel it's necessary to get their input on it. It's going to be limited because we want to make these changes independent of the overall recommendation of applicants, but we certainly do take it into account. I think particularly with the increase in funding, that is something we did hear from applicants quite a bit for discovery. And as I mentioned, particularly in the neuroscience arena, where it is proving to be difficult for many to accomplish the tasks they want to with the current levels of funding.
And Gil, do you mind if I add something else? Dr. Abusalem, with the DISC, we also did an analysis of, in the recent years, what was the percentage of awards that required a no-cost extension. And there was more than 60% of them required a no-cost extension. That was more than 6 months. So that kind of led us to realize that we needed to give them more time. And of course, from what Gil said, all the feedback that we get pre-application from the grant applicants is very useful also for the money amounts.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to lend my support to these changes, and I just echo what has been said about how expensive it is to do these kinds of basic experiments. I raised my hand immediately after the question about diversity. I just wanted to point out something that I'm sure has been pointed out many times to this group, that variation even within an isolated population between one individual and another is very great, and not all stem cells have the same genetic background from the same population. So having diversity of cell lines actually is a very good thing, because we want to see what is general and what is specific, and the more different types of cell lines that can be used, the more information we're going to get about heterogeneity and how applicable a basic discovery is from within all humans. And it's not necessarily something that's going to tell us about race or ethnicity or diversity in the sense that I think the question was raised. That's a strong point that we could talk about for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think, Dave, you were next, then Pat.
Yeah, just very quickly, I ditto what Mike just said. And just comment that I think taking cell lines and the genome sequences and trying to determine which ethnic group from which they're derived is
difficult.
A long time and very difficult. If it's a Neanderthal, you can probably do it these days. But,
although there's a lot of Neanderthal DNA in us.
I know, that's right.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Pat?
I don't think I can follow the Neanderthal reference, but I was just going to say, to echo this, first of all, the increase from 2 to 3 years is really important, extremely important. It's just unrealistic to be able to get through these projects in a 2-year time period, especially now, given all the challenges we have in terms of, time moves much more slowly now in terms of being able to ramp up because of supply chain issues, et cetera. We have to take that into account. The other is that we should be encouraging, within Ancestry and between Ancestry use of of cells to address this issue of heterogeneity. A lot of our data is an N of 1, meaning a single individual, and that's not generalizable. So I really support this.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, I think we need a motion to.
Elena has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Hello, Elena.
Thanks, JT. Just to build on what Pat was saying, I just want to, aside from this specific proposal, I want to just kind of bring up that everyone in this group, we need to really be mindful about how we're using some of these terms and differentiating between race and ancestry. I really appreciated that Pat was referring to ancestry as being the genetic differentiation between some of these lineages, which is distinct from the concepts of race and ethnicity that we sometimes sort of like layer onto individuals.
Thank you. Do we have, okay, we need a motion to approve. Thank you.
And I second.
Okay, who was the second on that one?
I'll defer to whoever the other person was that chimed in with
That
me.
was Kim.
Kim. Thank you, Kim. Okay.
Thank you. It's Anne Marie and Kim. Anne Marie was the first. I just want to confirm.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have further discussion or comment on this item? Let's see. So Al, do you want to go?
I appreciate, I believe it was Michael who made the comments regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion in cell lines. Certainly, as a patient advocate, it has been an important part of the work that we have been wanting to get inculcated in the reviews, and that the scientific reviewers also have been working in earnest to make sure that it is represented in the reviews. And so thank you for that, and I wanted to acknowledge that to members of the board. I also think that I want to acknowledge staff and the work that staff did around really advancing CIRM's role as the leading grant administrator around stem cell research in the country, let alone the world. I strongly endorse this proposal, and I endorse the also the comments that are associated with the time that it takes to really bring to fruition the kind of research that, again, isn't represented in CIRM's strategic plan.
Thank you, Al. Rosa, did you have your hand up there? No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anne Marie?
Very brief comment to say that I understand what has been said before, but in the end, I appreciate this proposal. Genetic is broader than genes, and while it's totally part of stem cell research, it will allow to have a broader research. Among others, mRNA, which obviously has been something extremely important to the health of the world, even recently, and will continue to be so more and more even in the future. So applaud this initiative. I applaud this initiative.
Thank you. And as we know, that new definition is furthered to the expansive language in Prop 14 itself. And so it's entirely consistent with that, as is everything else on the table here. Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Isabel. Hello, Isabel.
Sorry, I'm late. I came in the middle of the dance. It sounded very interesting, maybe like a pachanga or a mambo, but I really enjoyed what I heard. But can you give me the thumbnail of what I'm supposed to be voting on when this comes to a vote?
Gil, would you just like to give the 30-second forest view?
Certainly. So these are concept updates for the discovery, translational, and clinical programs. So there are a series of changes that are proposed related to the duration of award for Discovery 2, which was discussed, the award maximums that are allowed for some of these, and then a broadening of the definition of gene therapy to a genetic therapy, which includes now technology such as mRNA and antisense oligos. So those are just examples of some of the items that are proposed.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Been a very good, robust discussion here. Any comments from members of the public?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Will you please call the roll?
Yes. Haifa Abdullah,
Yes.
Mohammed Abu Salam,
Yes.
Kim Barrett,
Yes.
Dan Bernal, George Blumenthal,
Yes.
Linda Boxer,
Yes.
Michael Botchin,
Yes.
Leandra Clark Harvey,
Yes.
Anne Marie Dulege,
Yes.
Isabel Duron,
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbury,
Yes.
Fred Fisher.
Yes.
Fred, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Elena Flowers,
Yes.
Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein,
Yes.
David Higgins,
Yes.
Steve Guard, Rich Lahara,
Yes.
Pat Levitt,
Yes.
David Lowe,
Yes.
Linda Malkus,
Yes.
Dave Martin,
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed,
Yes.
Christine Miskowski,
Yes.
Lauren Miller Rogan,
Yes.
Adriana Padilla,
Yes.
Joe Panetta,
Yes.
Al Rolette,
Yes.
Barry Selleck,
Yes.
Marvin Southard,
Yes.
Michael Stamos,
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
Yes.
Art Torres,
Aye.
Christina Vori, Carol Watson. Carol, I'm sorry, are you on the line? The motion carries.
Thank you, Maria. We are going to take a 5-minute break here to give Beth's fingers a chance to relax, and we will reconvene in that period of time. Thank you.
Gonzalo? They're here.
Okay, we can get everybody to reconvene here, please. All right, we're going to continue along with the action item list here. We're on item number 11. No, I'm sorry, item number 12. Consideration of the process and timeline for selection of a new chair and vice chair for the ICOC. Dr. Gasson will present here. Judy?
Thank you very much, JT. And I have a report from the Governance Subcommittee. I think everyone knows that both JT and Art are termed out at the end of this year, at the end of December. And so hopefully you've had a chance to look at the memo from James Harrison that was included in the materials for today's meeting. I'm going to summarize the process and the timeline, and then I'm going to ask for a motion to approve and go forward. We are only discussing the process and the timeline today. We are not discussing the criteria, the percent effort, the job roles or responsibilities today. That will be at a later time. This board has the authority and the responsibility to elect a chair and a vice chair from among the individuals nominated by the constitutional officers. And that would be the governor, the lieutenant governor, the treasurer, and the controller. Once the board has had an opportunity to consider the parameters for the position of chair and vice chair, including the percent effort, compensation, and to identify any additional desired qualifications, the board will request the constitutional officers to nominate candidates to replace chair and vice chair, Thomas and Torres. Once the nominations are made for chair and vice chair, the governance committee and the board will have the opportunity to evaluate the nominees. In order to guide the selection of the chair and the vice chair, the governance subcommittee and the board will determine the scope of the roles of chair and vice chair, the percent effort required to undertake the duties of chair and vice chair, and the compensation. As you saw in the memo from James Harrison, during the last selection process, the board debated how the statutory duties of the chair should be carried out, whether it would be a partnership model as an executive chair or a more traditional chair of a board role. And these responsibilities will be defined by the board and then sent on to the constitutional officers. So the timeline for this process, I think Mariana has a slide that goes through the timeline. Thank you, Mariana. In March and April, we're going to conduct a survey of the board members to gather input with respect for the criteria for selection of the chair and the vice chair and the scope of the position. That survey will be sent out shortly, and the results will be anonymized and collated for further review by the board. Once that is finished, we will have the opportunity to consider the survey results and to prepare recommendations regarding the criteria, the scope, and the percent effort. By May, we should be able to consider the governance subcommittee's recommendation and make a determination with respect to these criteria, the scope, and the percent effort. So this entire process will be taking place over the next couple of months. Once that's completed, Marianne, in June, the governance subcommittee will request that the constitutional officers nominate candidates based on the criteria, the scope, and so on, as has been determined by the board members through the survey and through the governance committee. And we will request that the constitutional officers provide background information on the qualifications of the nominees, including a brief personal statement for us to consider. These materials will be made available to the board and to the public. In August and September, the subcommittee will vet the nominees, request additional information, interview them, etc. to obtain the relevant information prior to a vote. In September and October, the board will meet to consider the nominees, including public presentations by the candidates, closed session interviews, and a public vote. And if all goes according to plan, by January, we will have elected a new chair and a vice chair in December, and the individuals will take the oath of office at the board's first meeting in January of 2023, providing an orderly transition from our current chair and vice chair to the newly elected chair and vice chair. So we are requesting a motion to approve this process and this timeline at this time.
Thank you, Judy. Do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved. This is David in San Diego.
Second, Christina.
Thank you, David and Christina. Questions, comments from members of the board? Anne Marie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you also for this clarification. I realize that you cannot really predict all the timelines, but is there a plan to have an overlap between the current team and the new team, including at the first meeting, so that the transition is indeed as smooth as possible?
I'm going to answer your question, Anne Marie, but Marianne, could you remove the slide, please, so I can see everybody? Thank you very much. We discussed this, and there can only be one chair at a time and one vice chair at a time. However, the current Torres and Thomas chair and vice chair have expressed a willingness to have a process whereby the newly elected chair and vice chair would receive the relevant information, and they have also offered to continue to participate in any way to support the new chair and the new vice chair.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
This is David. Judy, is there any downside to what you've just proposed? Is there an opposing view? Is there anybody pushing back on you on this?
On which? On which, the timeline or the transition?
The proposal that you just read, yeah, the details of that, yeah.
No, I think that the governance committee has been, the process is the process, and it's pretty well delineated. And so I think the governance committee is unanimous in recommending that we approve this process and timeline.
That's why we have committees, and that's good. Enough said.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Anne Marie. Do we have any questions or comments from the public, Maria?
We do not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Judy, for this well-conceived plan, and to members of the governance subcommittee. Maria, will you please call the roll?
Haifa Abdullah.
Yes.
Mohammed Abu Salam.
Yes.
Kim Barrett.
Yes.
Dan Bernal. George Blumenthal.
Yes.
Linda Boxer.
Yes.
Michael Botchin.
Yes.
Leander Clark Harvey.
Yes.
Anne Marie Dulèche.
Yes.
Isabel Dudon.
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbury. Fred Fisher.
Yes.
Elena Flowers.
Yes.
Judy Gasson.
Yes.
Larry Goldstein. David Higgins.
Yes.
Steve Julesgard. Rich Lahara.
Yes.
Pat Levitt.
Yes.
David Lowe.
Yes.
Linda Malkus.
Yes.
Dave Martin.
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed.
Yes.
Christine Miaskowski.
Yes.
Lauren Miller Rogan.
Yes.
Adriana Padilla.
Yes.
Joe Panetta.
Yes.
Al Roulette.
Yes.
Barry Selleck. Marvin Southard.
Yes.
Michael Stamos.
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas. JT, you're on mute.
Yes.
Art Torres.
Aye.
Christina Vori.
Yes.
Carol Watson. The motion carries.
Thank you very much, Maria. And thank you again to Judy and Christina and all members of the Governance Subcommittee for your fine work. That concludes the action items. We are now going to circle back to Dr. Milan for the President's report. Maria?
Mr. Chairman, I am going to share my screen so I can get to the President's report. Okay. Is that visible on your screen? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, colleagues, and the members of the public. Good morning. I'll be giving a brief first quarter update on how we're doing since this board approved our strategic plan, our new 5-year strategic plan just 3 short months ago. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So with our mission statement, which has been reviewed earlier today, to accelerate world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse Californian world. We set forth 8 strategic goals for the next 5 years that are arranged in 3 strategic themes. This will be familiar to you as this was in the strategic plan that was presented in December and is in our strategic plan that is posted, and I hope that all of you have a copy of it. I'm just going to go through by strategic theme our progress on the initial launch of our 5-year strategic plan. So for the first strategic theme, advance world-class science, we've continued to build on our core funding opportunities, and some of them you had seen in the past couple of board meetings, one today in the clinical pillar. To date, this board has awarded $3.4 billion in awards across 5 pillars in discovery, translational, clinical, education, and infrastructure. And since the passage of Prop 14, $316 million has already been deployed from bonds authorized under this new proposition. Wanted to point out that during the wind down from the Prop 71 era through the transition period, that is a time around the passage of the bond initiative and to the relaunch of CIRM, and during the creation of the new strategic plan, this board has continued to award grants even during the transition period, especially in discovery and clinical. And upon relaunch of CIRM in the Prop 14 era, immediately relaunched across all 5 pillars. So the numbers you see here in orange are the number of awards per given pillar. In aggregate, this has led to the building of an extremely broad portfolio of programs, as you'll see in this pie chart, and specifically noting that 34% of these are in the CNS, in neurologic disease and eye disease. 40% of them are in rare disease, which is a very unique feature of the CIRM portfolio. We've invested in a diverse number of therapeutic modalities, most prominently in gene therapy, cell gene therapy, and cell therapy. We also, as has been presented today in our discovery and a translational and our clinical programs, support biologic and small molecules, provided they meet an unmet medical need and relate to stem cell and regenerative medicine. In terms of the strategic theme, delivering world-class real-world solutions, I wanted to highlight that again, during the transition period to the relaunch of CIRM and the Prop 14 era, the CIRM funding program has allowed us to continue to support clinical development all throughout. In fact, during the wind down of the Prop 71 era, we continued to grow our portfolio to 64 clinical trials in total funded. And during the transition, 4 clinical trials were funded. A phase 1 trial by Dr. Diana Farmer at UC Davis, which we supported in the preclinical stage, was funded late November to initiate a phase 1 trial for first in human in utero repair of spina bifida, which is a defect in the spinal cord in fetuses. This involves a combination of a cell therapy on a matrix, and this program has been launched. Another trial, the phase 2 trial, that involves a collaboration between Dr. David Williams at Harvard Boston Children's Hospital with California investigators utilizing the Alpha clinics as well as our GMP facilities in California, is a phase 2 trial by Dr. David Williams that induces fetal hemoglobin as a way of treatment for the devastating disease of sickle cell disease. What's notable about this trial by Dr. Williams, in addition to collaboration with experts in California at UCLA and UCSF, is that this is a collaborative funding between the NHLBI, the Institute for Heart, Lung, Blood at the NIH, and CIRM in a landmark memorandum of understanding to co-fund programs based on the CIRM funding model. In addition, 2 other programs were funded during this time, including an ultra-rare disease in infants called malignant osteopetrosis, which is a bone disease, and a phase 1 trial by Dr. Deeks for a duo CAR T trial for HIV. The CIRM programs comprise about 15% of this expedited pathway designation called the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, called RMAT, which was created under the 21st Century Cures Act. It's a way that programs have the opportunity to be accelerated through development with close partnership and collaboration and frequent interactions with the FDA. During this transition period and into the new launch, 2 of our programs achieved the expedited designations, including the RMAT for the Artemis SCID program, Severe Combined Immunodeficiency Program at UCSF. And in the third pillar of create opportunity for all, this board is very aware that very early on, we launched, restored, and supported existing programs in our education pillar, and including most recently approval by this board of a new program, the COMPASS program, also called the EDUC 5, EDUC 4, which will be which is now being launched. The program announcement's open and applications are being taken in. It's a very unique undergraduate program, but all these programs span from high school, undergraduate, graduate, and fellowship level trainees. These are important programs, again, consistent with the strategic plan to build the workforce and leadership of the future, to bring forward and to support the progress in the field of regenerative medicine. These create multiple on-ramps along the way through the educational process. So just very briefly, in the first quarter, that's 3 months since we launched a strategic plan in December, the following the progress has been made in the 3 pillars and the 3 thematic goals. In terms of advancing world-class science, the CIRM team conducted a CNS workshop where many of the board members had participated just this past month to inform the shared resource and knowledge networks concept development that is in that strategic goal. And then today, this board approved data sharing requirements and elements into all of our CIRM awards, again, in service of creation of these knowledge networks. Today, you also supported the approval of DISC 0 concept, and that will allow us to build a pipeline and shed light on basic and foundational research in order to overcome the needs that we still have, especially in CNS disease, but also other areas. And you have recently approved the Alpha Clinics expansion concept. This RFA This program announcement is now open for applications based on that approved concept. As mentioned in the previous slide, the educational programs have been launched, and the ICOC approved the new undergraduate education program that creating opportunities for mentorship and partnership across stem cell science, the COMPASS program. And we're really pleased to welcome our new Vice President of Medical Affairs, which is now represents a new department within CIRM called Medical Affairs and Policy. This group will work within the team with our AAWG and the ICOC to develop a roadmap for access and affordability, a bold goal for our 5-year strategic plan. And as noted earlier, the review team has already incorporated DEI and the evaluation tools, and in partnership with the board members who serve on the GWG have been continuing to refine this. We have a very solid platform for which to continue to iterate and develop. Now, a very important thing is I'm very pleased to announce our new team members. In the gray are the team members that were introduced last year when we first launched the CIRM under Prop 14. And since then, I'm going to have to look because this is a very impressive group of people. So I'm going to look at their backgrounds and share them with you a bit. Since last fall, we've recruited 10 additional team members. So I'd like to just give a brief introduction to these team members. Dr. Linda Nevin joins us as a senior science officer on the review and portfolio development team. Linda is a former associate editor for the journal PLOS Medicine, where she brings experience in topics of data sharing and health equity and research, very relevant to where CIRM is today. Stephanie Bautista, who keeps me on track. We're so fortunate to have her come in. She comes from VEO Healthcare. She has served as a support for me, for the leadership team, and across the organization. Marianne Villablanca, who you all know very, very well, comes to us from Kaiser. And you all know her well because she certainly hit the ground running and supporting the board through this impressive and very busy schedule of meetings, subcommittee meetings, and working groups, along with Maria. Katie Sharifi is our new communications team coordinator. We're very pleased to welcome Katie, who is a patient in one of CIRM's first clinical trials. She's been a tireless supporter and advocate on behalf of CIRM, and she certainly brings an extremely valuable perspective to the work we do. Esteban Cortez is our new director of marketing and communications, who brings incredible insight and experience from his past role in marketing and communications at the Raphael House, a nonprofit organization that is the first and largest family homeless shelter in San Francisco. Again, bringing in real life experience and expertise into our team. Mazyar Shah Mohammed is a senior science officer in our scientific programs group. His PhD is in biomaterials and tissue engineering from McGill, and he was a lead reviewer in the US FDA for the Center of Devices and Radiologic Health. I have to take a breath. There are a lot of new team members here. Lisa Mcginley. Dr. Mcginley is a senior science officer in therapeutics and development. She received her PhD from Ireland and did a fellowship in bioengineering at Georgia Tech, and comes to us from the University of Michigan, where she was assistant professor and led NIH-funded collaborative stem cell initiative developing therapeutics in ALS and Alzheimer's. Mason Saya received his bachelor's in psychology from the University of Oregon, and he trained in web development at the App Academy. We're pleased to welcome Mason as our software engineer at CIRM. And Tracy Nguyen is a CIRM's new project manager on the therapeutics development group. She received her master's in public health from the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, and joins us from the Unity Council, nonprofit community development organization that's committed to equity and improving the quality of life of traditionally underserved communities. And Mazyar, did I miss you? I think I did him out of order. Mazyar joined us in December. And then, as you know, we launched a strategic plan in December, just to give context. And we then hired Tracy and then Sean Turbeville, who is our new Vice President of Medical Affairs and Policy. Sean has his PhD in epidemiology, taught it at the University of Oklahoma, where he had done his PhD, and has almost 20 years of experience in medical affairs and biopharma, where he supported the development of therapeutics across a broad range of indications. He's created a global regulatory resource for biopharma, both on medical information and very importantly for us on compassionate use, expanded use programs. And before joining CIRM, Sean was the president of the Matanzas Group, which is a medical affairs consultancy. He's a mission-driven patient advocate, and he serves on the board of the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, which he co-founded with other family members after his own personal loss. At that foundation, he drove the creation of alliances with companies to increase access to clinical trials for patients with this devastating cancer. I'm just going to give Sean an opportunity to say hello to the board. Sean?
Yeah, thank you, Maria, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Really excited to be part of this organization. This is very unique. I'm just chewing at the bit to get ready to start implementing some of these programs that you guys have ready to be in play for patients. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. You will hear a lot more from Sean. He's been working very closely with Senator Torres and the AAWG and with our team members. So that's all I have by way of background and introductions. And I'm very pleased to then turn it over to some of our, I call them OG team members, legacy team members from Prop 71. We built an incredible team here at CIRM, just feel fortunate to be working with all of them. But Gail Sombrano and Jen Lewis are two of the members of the leadership team, and they'll be giving you an overview of the grant making process that we have here at CIRM that had given rise to some of the programs you looked at today. Mr. Chairman, may I turn it over to you to introduce Gil, or do you want me to just go straight to Gil?
Why don't you just go straight to Gil? Thank you.
Gil, you're on.
Okay, thank you. So I need to share my screen. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. I want to give an overview of the application and review process, and I hope that the level of detail is neither too much nor too little, trying to balance out what I thought might be most appropriate. So our mission continues to be, as has been stated multiple times, and I just want to say we keep reiterating it because it's really important and it really does drive what we do. So we try to include it in every one of our presentations. So let me start with where the process for application begins. So we have both recurring funding opportunities as well as non-recurring. And so the recurring funding opportunities are found as examples mostly in our discovery, translation, and clinical pillars. So such as the Discovery Zero, which was the fundamental biology, which was approved today, the Quest program that has been ongoing, which has multiple cycles per year. Translation has different offerings twice a year, and then the clinical program, which is offered 12 times per year. And so these have standing program announcements that describe these, and so the deadlines occur over the course of the year several times. The goal is for these to be predictable and recurring in a consistent manner each year. We also have non-recurring funding opportunities, and these are typically defined under a request for applications or an RFA. And so examples of these may be such as the Alpha Clinics Network, which is currently out. And so some of these may occur every few years. That is true for all of the education programs, such as Bridges and Spark, which we bring to you every 5 years or so. And some that we may just do once. So we did several years ago, Accelerating Center and Translating Center. Those happened just once, and those probably will not be done again. And as mentioned, all of these are described in requests for application if they're non-recurring, or under a program announcement if they are recurring. And the goal of these documents that are based on the concepts that you approve here at the board are to describe as best as we can what it is that CIRM is looking for and how it is that an applicant can meet the eligibility criteria and overall understand the terms of an award and what it's going to take to earn one. And so that is where the process begins. And so for those that then choose to submit an application, the overall review process begins at application submission at one of those deadlines. And we divide it into 3 general phases. So there's the eligibility phase, the merit review phase, which is conducted by the grants working group, and then the last, which is the presentation to the application review subcommittee of the board that makes the final decision. So I'm going to take you through some of these steps just to help you understand what happens during these phases. So in the next phase, we have the application submission, and then what happens there. So this is all done internally by the CIRM team, and we assess whether this is an application that we can accept for review in order to determine, one, if it's complete and has all the requisite parts that are going to make it reviewable. If it's a company, we do a solvency assessment to make sure that they're going to be solvent for at least the next 6 months. If there is a co-funding requirement, that the appropriate co-funding is provided, that the status as a California-based organization is determined, and whether the program is in scope under CIRM rules. So for example, whether it's really utilizing stem cells or a gene therapy. And so once we do that, then it can go on to the next step. But oftentimes, and this happens quite a bit with our clinical program, applicants will submit an application to CIRM, but we go through sometimes multiple iterations of having to fix or make changes to ensure that an application is really complete, that it has all the elements. So most of the time, somebody is not outright ineligible. Many times it is really about making changes or fixes before it goes on. And so we try to work with applicants to make sure that, to the extent possible, their application is going to be complete and reviewable going forward. Once it is accepted and goes forward, then that's when we prepare for the merit review by the grants working group. So the grants working group itself is the body that's responsible for evaluating everything that comes to CIRM and providing a recommendation to the board on whether it should be funded or not. And so as a body, the grants working group must evaluate proposals across all the different pillars, from discovery through clinical to infrastructure, which encompasses a very broad scope. And I'll explain in a minute how we try to bring the appropriate expertise to all of this. But in summary, we do assemble expert panels depending on the opportunity to meet those needs. The composition of the working group itself, I've shown this slide before, but I'll just reiterate, it includes 15 scientific members, all who are from outside of California, and they conduct the scientific evaluation and provide the scientific score. The grants working group patient advocate or nurse members, who also serve on the ICOC board. There are 7 members, and they conduct the DEI evaluation, provide the patient perspective on potential and impact and significance, and oversight on the process. And so you see the DEI score as you did earlier with the CLIN program, but they also provide suggested scientific score when looking at applications in the translational and clinical programs. And also, as mentioned earlier, we have then the scientific specialists who participate on the panel on an ad hoc basis for a given application to bring additional expertise when we need it. These members do not vote or score on the application, but they do provide a critique and contribute their expert opinion to the group. Now, going back to how it is that we then assemble these panels, we maintain a large pool of experts, and as earlier today, you approved additional members that continue to add to this expertise pool that covers a lot of different areas, from basic biology to clinical, regulatory affairs, education, and that broad and diverse group of individuals allow us then to assemble a panel of 15 scientists that are appropriate for each of the review cycles that we get for discovery, translational, clinical, and each cohort of applications that we get will define in many ways the experts that we're going to need to put together into a panel so that we can maximize the likelihood that we have the right experts for all the applications that are being considered. So once we have a panel assembled, we go through the process of making specific assignments to these individuals and having them review. We come together in a grants working group meeting where everybody shares their opinion on the applications and have a discussion on each of them, and lastly score them. And the score is what drives the recommendation of the working group in terms of whether something should be funded or not. We have two different scoring schemes depending on whether it's a clinical application or a discovery translational application. For the clinical program, we use the 1, 2, 3 scoring system, with 1 warranting funding, 2 needing improvement, and 3 do not fund. And we do this basically because each application is assessed independently. For any given cycle of the 12 cycles that we do each year, we may get 1 application. So there's really nothing to compare that to within a cohort. Sometimes we get 5, but half of them may get a score of 2 and not stay with that initial cohort that they came in with. So as a result, they're viewed independently. But also this score of 2 has been a really great tool in allowing applicants to respond to reviewer concerns and resubmit without having to restart a new application. What happens here is we provide a summary of concerns to the applicant soon after the review takes place. They have then the opportunity to revise the application, provide comments that then the grants working group will look again at whatever the next available meeting is, and they will score again. And so most of the time, so about 60% of the time or more, those that got a 2 and resubmitted will come out after the second try with a score of 1, because it allowed that team to develop an improved and better application. Now, for the discovery and translation programs, we use a scoring system on a scale of 1 to 100, and we create a cutoff at 85. So anything that receives a score of 85 or more is recommended for funding. Anything less is not recommended for funding. And so you will see these applications are ranked and ordered by score, and we present those as a whole cohort to the board when the recommendations are finally made on each of those. The other new scoring system that we've developed is that for scoring DEI, and currently this exists only in the clinical program, and it is utilized by our board members, our patient advocate and nurse members. And the scale is 0 to 10, with 10 being the most outstanding DEI response. We have developed a rubric table that continues to evolve and be developed, and that helps inform and guide the scoring for the board members. Okay, and so once applications are reviewed and scored, we get to the final phase, which is the funding decision that is done at the board by the application review subcommittee. And so we have scheduled monthly application review subcommittee meetings, given that we have typically at least one, usually 2 reviews each month. So the outcomes of each of those reviews will go to the next month's application review subcommittee for presentation, where we bring to you the score, summary of key strengths and weaknesses from each application. And the goal here is to conduct a programmatic review, not necessarily to reiterate the scientific review that has happened at the GWG, and ultimately to vote to fund or not fund a project. And the programmatic considerations can be quite varied, and there are different elements that come into play in making a programmatic assessment. Part of it is to take into account what the scientific score and overall ranking of an application may be, but also to ensure that the projects that are proposed are aligned with the CIRM mission and objectives of the overall opportunity, that they have a potential impact on patients, how it fits within the portfolio of projects that we are funding. In some cases, there are projects or areas of study that we have not historically funded that we may want to fund, or some areas that we have funded a lot of. So programmatic discussion can involve that. It can include assessment or further assessment of DEI and or the score that is given, as well as the availability of funds. In some cases, we set a budget for a particular set of opportunities, and we may have more applications recommended that can be funded. And so the decision on which ones should be funded becomes part of the programmatic assessment that happens at the board. So that kind of covers the spectrum of activities that happen during the application and the review process. And lastly, I just want to point to a publication that we had from 2020, where you can find more details on the overall process that includes the review, but as well as post-award management of our awards. And it speaks to how we try to create processes that both accelerate the advancement of these projects and help applicants succeed once we fund them in achieving their milestones and objectives. So if you're interested, feel free to look at the self-stem cell article from 2020, April 2020. And so that is it from me. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
Gil, can you just sort of preemptively, thank you very much, by the way, for that presentation on what really is I call the meat and potatoes of the whole CIRM operation, and is something that is refined and very well oiled at this point, and has yielded this best-in-class portfolio that we have. Could you just send that stem cell article to members of the board, please, so that they have it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Larry.
Yeah, Gil, a terrific presentation as always. What I wanted to ask is it still standard practice for members of the grants working group to serve a trial period before being selected as permanent members?
We try to do it to the extent that it's possible, and it's easiest to do it with our recurring opportunities, especially in fields and areas that we commonly get applications for. However, there are times that we have reviews and opportunities, education, infrastructure, for example, that are going to be a one-time occurrence, and we need experts in a particular area. And so those, we base it more on recommendation, us speaking with them to figure out if they're the right fit, and whether they understand the goals of the opportunity before we bring them in. But in some way, we do try to vet. Most often, we try to vet by having them participate as specialists when we can.
Thank you.
I think Anne Marie was next, and then Kim, and then Isabel.
No, Isabel has her hand raised. I'm sorry, she's before Anne Marie. It's
Yeah,
Isabel, Anne Marie, Kim.
Okay, for some reason it's not in order on my screen. So Isabel.
Doesn't matter at all.
No, not at all. Thank you. And thank you, Gil, because it's, for me, constantly good reminder how to separate all the science and the thinking around how you build, and review applications. But what I'm wondering is why the DEI rubric is applied only to clinical, when I think it should be applied across all research, unless maybe it's the lab and it's about spit, although I think there are various, kinds of spit out there that, but I mean, I'm a little facetious, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And so let me just clarify that. Our expectations for addressing DEI is across the board. So everything from discovery through CLIN, applicants address in some way. And it is different for clinical than it is for early discovery. However, at the moment, the only place where we are having our board members score DEI specifically is in the clinical program. For all the other programs, it's incorporated into the overall score that you see of the 1 to 100 for TRAN or discovery. What we're hoping to do is, as we solidify the process that's happening in CLIN with our board members, we want to extend it into TRAN, because it means that for each application, we do an assignment. So each board member is assigned to review an application. As we get into discovery, we're talking about, close to 100 applications sometimes. So that may become a little bit difficult to do. And so we may hold off on doing it specifically as a score in that arena, but we do intend to include it in translation as well as in CLIN.
Thank you. That makes sense. I think that what I'm hoping CIRM does in a historical fashion is send a message to all researchers that this is a critical piece that they need to consider, no matter how labor intensive it is. And even for CIRM, I know it's labor intensive, but thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Okay, Anne Marie.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maria and Gil, for your presentations. It's always important and uplifting to see that you keep us updated about the future, not just the present, but the future. And this is my way to welcome, I assume on behalf of the board, but certainly on behalf of myself, all the new members to the team. It's great to see all coming. Maria, a question for you. Can you tell us roughly what's proportion are new positions versus replacement of previous positions? Interested to see about the growth of the employee pool as a whole. And a second question is, welcome particularly to Esteban. What's the role of Esteban versus that of Kevin McCormack? That's it.
Thank you so much, Emery. The majority of positions are new positions. but there have been some vacated positions that, are now vacated. So what happens is based on the programmatic needs and the workload and the whatever new types of programs we have that require specialization that we want to bring in-house, we create new positions. So how we're doing things is that every year when we bring to you, in May, Pune Simpson's going to bring to you a budget. The budget is to add whatever new positions is needed on top of current positions. And it's in that, so really we've been fortunate that we kept the core group together, and in the team build, for sure, we're replacing numbers of people, but what's happening is we've reorganized and in some ways internally. So we really view them all as pretty much new positions, although they're replacing established roles. I hope that makes sense. And in terms of the differentiation between the various team members, I would defer that to Maria Bonneville, who oversees that whole department. Maria?
Thanks, Maria. So the difference, Kevin McCormick moved over to be Director of Patient Advocacy. So he'll be focusing specifically on patient advocacy outreach and getting into the communities. And Esteban is our Director of Communications and Marketing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that welcome.
Kim?
Yeah, I want to thank Maria and Gil for your very informative presentations. And JT said something that I think that is important, that this really highlights our best-in-class portfolio. But I think that before you can have a best-in-class portfolio, you have to have a best-in-class process. And I'm a relatively new board member, but I have been incredibly impressed by the attention that has been paid to designing the review process, particularly with respect to avoiding conflicts of interest. And I just want to congratulate the team on doing that. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but thank you very much for those presentations.
Thank you, Kim. Any other comments or questions there? Yes.
Hi, JT. This
Al.
is Al Roulette.
Al, yes. Hey, Al.
I wanted to acknowledge Gil's presentation and Maria's presentation, and certainly encourage the new patient advocates. This kind of onboarding is, I think, reflective of your commitment, Gil, to make sure that the organization is an exemplary grant management organization, which I think is one of our primary pillars. So thank you all very much for doing that. And I hope that the newly appointed patient advocates will be involved in the grant review process. I want to speak also specifically to Isabel's point about discovery. And as a patient advocate who is asked to be involved in the positive selection process, oftentimes there are components of the science that I don't understand and may even have to defer to Gil as I complete my selection. It is still, I think, an imperative that we include DEI and components of DEI in that area of review. And while I recognize it's a stretch, I want to make sure that it's not a lost stretch goal, or as Isabel said, she used the analogy of spit. However, we are able to ensure that cell lines reflect the unique diversity of all the citizens or the individuals in the wonderful state that we get to represent. I think that that's important. So again, to summarize, I appreciate the presentation and the work, and I want to underscore the DEI components again.
Thank you, Al, and thank you all members of the GWG from the board, the patient advocates on the board who are so involved in analyzing the DEI components of each of the presentations that comes before the GWG. It is a fundamentally important element of the GWG consideration, and as Gil pointed out, continues to be refined and made better and even more integral. So thank you to all of the patient advocate members of the GWG. Next, Haifa.
Thank you for a great presentation. I just had a question. If I understood correctly, the scientists in the GWG panel, I think I've heard they are all from outside California. And I just wanted to clarify that. And is that just to avoid conflict of interest? And is there any way we can involve scientists from California, but then, you know, work on a mechanism to avoid conflict of interest?
Yes, that's a great question. And but the bylaws under CIRM for Grants Working Group members is that they must not reside or be employed in California. And the main reason for that is indeed to avoid conflict of interest in California to the extent possible. Now, I also mentioned the use of specialists, which are non-voting, non-scoring members. And so in some instances, we have utilized experts from California in that role. And so that is one way in which California scientists can participate.
Okay, thank you.
Art has his hand raised. JT.
Yeah, sorry, somebody keeps muting me. I assume that's you, Maria. Art, sorry.
That's all right, thank you. These issues came up almost 10 years ago when I started questioning why we had no Native American clients in our clinical trials and how we were going to improve upon that. And then, of course, it raised itself again during the COVID crisis when an inordinate amount of African American, Latino, and Native American reservations were impacted by the infection. And now we're coming clear to yesterday's hearing before the US Senate when my former Coral Fellow, Senator Padilla, asked some very important questions of Justice Jackson. And we found out that she's going to have to recuse herself from the proposed lawsuit by Harvard and University of North Carolina on affirmative action and on DEI. And so this is going to have an impactful influence on us and how we formulate our responses, not only for the University of California in light of Prop 209, but if Jackson is confirmed, God willing, and she sits on the court, she has said publicly that she will recuse herself from this decision, which may lead to a very onerous decision that, again, we're going to have to look at to make sure that we're in compliance with that. But again, my thanks to Gilbert and the staff for doing an excellent job in promoting and developing this this literature and this approach.
Thank you, Art. Looks like those are the comments. We've had two excellent presentations and we have one excellent presentation to go. So Maria, could you introduce Jen, please?
That's what I was going to say. And then there's more, and this is really important. I'd love to introduce Jen Lewis, who's our head of grants management, but also operations. And she's been a spectacular leader and team member to make sure that our grant compliance and our contracting goes smoothly and expeditiously, as you've seen from our metrics. So Jen, please take us away.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, JT and members of the board for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit more about grants management team and our operations. Can everybody see this presentation? And make sure I can see you still. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So the grants management team is responsible for contracting and financial monitoring compliance of CIRM's portfolio by ensuring all awards are administered within the regulations of Prop 14 and this governing board. And so today I wanted to give you just a brief overview of the types of fiscal management and compliance. And in the next few slides, we'll focus on initial budget reviews that we perform in partnership with Gil's team in the review process, our milestones and disbursements that go into our contracting process, our monitoring and reporting requirements, as well as our financial compliance program. And as Gil mentioned, I just wanted to echo that we do start all our presentations out with our mission, but just speaking for the grants management team in particular and operations, we really take this to heart as we see processes and systems come to play and how can we best accelerate our internal systems to get therapies out and treatments out to patients. And so it is something that we all really think of and keep to heart. So starting off with application budget review, as Gil mentioned, for our largest, during the time of application prior to a grants working group review, the CIRM team conducts an initial high-level budget review for some of our most expensive programs in the clinical portfolio and infrastructure portfolio. And these reviews confirm that the budget is allowable, allocable, complete, and well justified. And we also take a look and benchmark our clinical programs amongst our general portfolio of similar sizes and indications to see how the costs measure. Several reasons why we do this is to ensure that once applications come to the GWG and to the board, is that costs have been evaluated thoroughly and are eligible for CIRM funds. And it also speaks to our acceleration in allowing for early due diligence to begin at the time of application. So if something is approved for funding by the board, we can accelerate our time from contracting to project start and project readiness in an expeditious way. So after an award is approved by the board, our awardees have a specified time frame to begin activities, as mentioned, to launch a CIRM-funded project. And so for our clinical stage programs, that's 45 days from board approval to issuing a contract. As mentioned in the previous presentations for the concept changes, our translation and discovery stage programs have been 60 days, and that will now change to 90 days, as well as our education program and infrastructure programs have a 90-day contracting window. So during this launch period, the CIRM team of grants management officers and science officers work very closely together with our awardees to establish milestones and disbursements that go into our contracts. We conduct a final budget review to ensure all costs are allowable, but also make any cuts that are not allowable and need to be reduced from the award, as well as ensure project readiness, that all projects are ready to start on day one of getting that contract. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to dive into a little deeper of what the two types of milestones that we have are, as well as the milestone process and what that means, particularly with our operational milestones. CIRM contracts include what we call project milestones or operational milestones, which are objective measures based on the applicant's proposed timeline, as well as key aims or milestones that are in the original application. And this is what we then develop further and put into a contract, what we call a notice of award. And so for our education and discovery programs, we set what we call project milestones, where progress is monitored with periodic reporting by the grants management and science teams, and disbursements are not made until a science officer has approved the progress in that report and feels that it's sufficient. And we also ensure that all other compliance and other reporting have been submitted in order to trigger any sort of payment. Our education awards, as discussed previously in many of the approvals that you have made over the past year in our education programs, we do require an additional level of approval of submission of trainee appointment to release trainee funds. That way we're monitoring that the slots that were proposed in the application are actually being filled and meet the requirements that are being looked for the program, the particular training program that is being offered. One key thing for project milestones, though, is payment is not directly tied to the actual milestone being achieved, which we'll get to more in our operational milestones. However, failure to meet that milestone does give us CIRM the right at any time to suspend payments. But given the types of programs, we formulate project milestones instead of a more rigorous operational milestone. In our translation and clinical areas and infrastructure awards, we also structure awards with operational milestones where progress is attached to funding. And in the next few slides, I'd like to outline what that process looks like and how that best de-risks CIRM's investment. So as mentioned, operational milestones are set on objective measures of progress, and prior to contracting an award, The science officer and grants management officer work together to outline what those objective markers of success are, the date of achievement, and utilize that application budget to calculate the funds required to achieve each of these milestone periods. So in the next few slides, I'll walk you through how the system works. And so in this example right here, we're showing a $3 million award with 3 key milestones of enrollment, 33%, 66%, and 100% over the course of an award. And so when a contract is launched, we will issue an upfront disbursement that provides enough funding for an awardee to get to that first operational milestone. So at contract launch, in this example, we'd issue $1 million that would fund all activities in that budget application in the budget to get to the 33% enrolled. And then once that operational milestone is achieved, we'd make another upfront disbursement, providing funds to get to the next operational milestone, and so on and so forth until the awardee achieves that milestone. However, if an awardee experiences a delay in achieving a milestone, disbursements will be suspended until that milestone is reached. And any shortfall would be covered by an awardee's contingency funds until that milestone is achieved and the next payment is released. And that's something that we really evaluate in that initial budget review, along with the review team, in ensuring that the awardee has a plan if any contingency funds are needed. And although CIRM suspends payment and expects the awardee to then use their contingency funds, the CIRM team is actively engaged in throughout the process with an awardee to, one, identify if we see that there could be a gap in expenditure. So the grants management team is constantly evaluating financials and giving and talking to awardees ahead of time if there seems to be a gap that could be coming in the future, as well as Dr. Albuquerque and the therapeutic development team are working with awardees to conduct advisory panels. So they're also looking at the progress and the scientific progress. How are things going, and are we going to see any issues that will impact achieving the next milestone? And conversely, if an awardee achieves an OM early, any savings from that previous disbursement can be carried forward to further the project towards the next milestone. And in addition, any excess funds, if an awardee achieves the end objective in an award early and ahead of schedule and has savings as well, we have what we call post-project allowable costs, which allows an awardee to propose how to use those remaining funds to either further that particular project or another project that fulfills CIRM's mission. And then lastly, as part of this process, our TRAN and clinical awards have a co-funding requirement, as mentioned in the previous presentation. And these requirements depend on the type of institution, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit or a particular phase of the project, and are specified in the program announcements. But the requirement is to ensure that funding is not fully is there to ensure that CIRM funding is not expended and there's no source of additional funds. Our goal here is to ensure that a project wouldn't halt or progress slow down because funding is not available. Thus, the way we monitor this is to continuously require that co-funding is expended in line and in step with CIRM funding. So at each milestone achievement, we're ensuring that an awardee has enough funds to meet the next co-funding requirement to get to the next milestone. And at each of those times, we ask the awardee to provide evidence of having those funds available at that time. So once an award is launched, I wanted to give you a brief snapshot of the various types of monitoring and oversight that we have of programs. And so we have progress reports across each of our program types, which include focused updates on these milestones and progress, as well as sections regarding compliance, whether it's ensuring that the PI effort is meeting our regulations or other protocol certifications. We require financial reporting, requesting confirmation of how much has been dispersed, how much has been spent, and any verification of co-funding or contingency used to date. These frequencies depend on the program and type, as you can see here. For our translation, clinical, and infrastructure awards, we have operational milestone reports. And these are submitted at the time of the achievement of that milestone. And these are what trigger the disbursement or payment for the next milestone, as described in previous slides. And for our education program, as mentioned, we require that all trainees in the program, that the program director is submitting the actual appointments and verification that they've recruited trainees into the program, and thus that triggers a payment as well. All of CIRM's award contracts require awardee institutions to disclose whether they have had a publication or invention or another technology that has come from that CIRM funding. The requirement per our regulations is within 60 days. So that's something that we also are monitoring. And two other areas I wanted to just touch on is awardee institutions are annually required to report back to CIRM on our utilization of patents, licenses, and any other commercial technologies that have come out of CIRM funding. And lastly, CIRM conducts what we call a financial compliance program, where we actually visit institutions. And on the next slide, I'd like to share a little bit more about that. So this, in the start of Prop 71, at the recommendation of the State Bureau of Audits, CIRM began a structured compliance program. And the grants management team has refined this to a process where annually we review 6 awardee institutions, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, and we sample transactions, and in that are requesting evidence to support any expenditures applied to CIRM funds on these sample of awards. And during these audits, most of our awardees, although that percentage is changing, as JT mentioned earlier, are research universities who are already subject to federal audits. So our CIRM audit is not to repeat those audits, but rather to focus on CIRM specific issues. And in that, we're focusing on allowable costs for our grants administration policy or other related program announcements. And findings have resulted in awardee organizations reversing unallowable costs or refunds to the agency or other adjustments that have more broadly impacted the institution and refunds to CIRM. Some small examples of that would be salaries over our salary cap by PIs or other, there were also unallowable costs that we've discovered. So lastly, I just wanted to share that, as Dr. Milan mentioned, this board has approved $3.4 billion in funding, and 382 million of these funds resulted from return funds due to fiscal monitoring compliance that were redeployed to allow this board to approve additional awards and fund more programs. And I think that's a great attribute to some of the systems that we put in place. As well as, I wanted to touch on, we talked about co-funding, and due to the co-funding requirement that are on our programs, 1.1 billion has been committed by awardees to date in partnership with CIRM dollars to fund programs. And so with that, I just wanted to highlight the small but mighty team behind all of this. And really these 3 individuals here, Doug Kearney, Ryan Wells, and Alexandra Caraballo, are the core that support this and really make sure that our investment is being spent wisely. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.
So first of all, Jen, thank you very much to you and your team for all the great work you do in running grants management. It is a Herculean task given the number of grants we have outstanding, and you and your team have always done a wonderful job. I should note for newer members of the board that all of the involvement that CIRM has with grantees, actually starting before application and through the process of implementing the grants, is really unique. no other granting agency that I'm aware of has anywhere near the ongoing involvement that we do between the milestone check-in, the advisory panels, et cetera. And as a result, I think we are positioned to be able to get the best possible results working with the extraordinary grantees that we have spread throughout academia and industry in the state of California. Indeed, such is the nature of our process that several years ago, the NIH actually had us back to talk to a number of the individual institutes to describe our process, which was an extraordinary validation of everything that we have put in place, and a real credit to what all members of the team do to make this possible. So thank you very much, Jen, again, to you and your team. Maria, since I don't have the ordering correct on my screen here, will you please?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate it. Yes, Isabel's next.
Thank you very much. Yes, nice to meet you, Jennifer. See all the work that your team is doing. I hope you have a little pen handy because I have a number of questions. But my first one is, how many nonprofits actually have applied and been funded? And what is their annual budget that they can actually take on a major project like one of these? So that's question number one. And then I'll let you answer, and then I'll go on to the next thing.
So how many nonprofits have applied generally? So generally we've had, I think we have 60% of our portfolio about is nonprofit organizations, and about 40, well, in our clinical space, 40%. I'd say a majority outside of that is nonprofits, so research institutions. I think you're just, I want to get to the heart of your question though, which I think is you're trying to differentiate between maybe academic research institutions and nonprofits. I'd say nonprofits is a very small portion of our portfolio, although in recent application rounds, we have seen more smaller nonprofit institutes apply as well.
I guess even I'm thinking even more micro, and that's community-based organizations who are also nonprofits. And so that goes to my next area. In the application, as much as we look at DEI, can you, or this might be something the board has to approve, or we may be constrained by state laws or whatever, can we require applicants to include a line item for CBO engagement where there's an equitable investment, so that if they're necessary to the recruitment of raising awareness in, as particularly racial, ethnic, and underrepresented populations, so that their time, training, and engagement is recompensed, because you're asking CBOs to put forth their time and talent. And so an equitable line of investment in them when you're asking them to participate. Second of all, a line item that requires the researchers, the academics, to report back and disseminate to communities where there is impact, how their engagement is helped inform the research, and therefore why it is necessary that they be engaged. I'm afraid not enough goes from one end of the aisle to the other, so that community, and more widely the citizens of California, are not really getting back the bang for their buck in being informed in what was done with that project, how it impacted which communities, and why that has made a difference for those communities to be engaged. I'd like those to be line items in their budget. I think it's been passed over way too long, and I'd like to know if we can do that. But I think that would vastly improve the engagement of CBOs, that they can be equitably recompensed for their time and their efforts.
Sure. So I think, whether current applicants are doing that, they have the flexibility to utilize the funds. But to your point on requiring it, I think that would be something that a decision of that would have to be a decision of the board, that if they would like to add that to any of our programs and put that in, whether it's all of our programs or some of them, as an extra additional funds or required funds, and how we'd like to monitor that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Michael's next.
Oh, hi. Yeah, great report and a lot of facts. I had sort of a pinhead question. What fraction of the total grants are actually, you gave us a number, a lump sum number of the amount of money that you've recovered and then reused. What fraction of the grants actually give back money or are terminated for whatever reason? Do you have any granularity for that? I mean, I could probably do some, tablecloth calculations, but
I would say I don't have the percentage in front of me. The amount is very small that are actually terminated. I'd say over this, we've made almost 1,200 awards because of that partnership model. Only to say that also we established that milestone system in the past several years. So if you're looking at that whole portfolio, it's only in more recent years that we've had that more suspension and termination model. But I'd say I can get that number though and have that distributed out, but I'd say it's a smaller percentage that as we really try to work with our awardees to ensure project success is viable. If it's not viable, then we do wind down the award and terminate.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have a ballpark number for what the percent might be?
Not.
It's okay if you don't. I'm just curious.
And if I may pipe in, I think that if you look at the numbers in general ballpark, a lot of them are related to clinical awards because there is some variability in terms of ability to the actual enrollment. Sometimes they enroll fewer than they expected to, or don't need to enroll as many as they needed to. And then in some cases, as Jen said, there were programs that were terminated based on futility, which is the correct thing to do. And that does give us an opportunity to recover those funds so it can be deployed for other programs. But it's very rare that programs will be terminated at all, because science is science, although what we do try to do is assist, advise, and get them the programs to be able to meet their milestones, and are just in close communication to see what kind of obstacles may come in their way. And so the system that Jen described really does allow us not just an adjudication or punitive at all. It's more of an ability to impact a course correction where needed, and then in very extreme cases to recover the funds so that it can be used for other research.
Thank you.
George.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Jennifer. I think this was a really important and good report that you gave. I have two questions. Well, the first one I think is very quick. You mentioned that you do 6 audits a year annually. Are those chosen randomly, or are there criteria that you use to decide which programs to audit?
We try to first we do randomly selection. We try though to look at past maybe 1 or 2 years to ensure we're not repeating institutions, because we want to diversify. We also then take that to see who's had some key progress or achievements, who have utilized the funds. So we marry that together, but mostly random. And once we have a short list, we'll start to see how we can decipher out who the best, who's had the most activity that makes the most sense to visit at that time.
Great, thank you. The other question is, I noticed that roughly, in fact, more than 10% of the funds that have been awarded have now been recovered. I mean, the amount of recovery is really quite huge, more than $300 million over the years. And I don't know whether I should be pleased at that number or disappointed at that number, because on the one hand, it's great that you're doing recovery, and yet 10% seems like a lot to me. Can you
Sure.
put into a context?
Yeah. So, and that's what kind of speaks to a little bit, I think, the other question that was asked. It's not solely due to terminating projects, right? It's also due to due diligence between what the amount that's been approved by this board and when you get to contracting. So it's looking at those budgets, making sure that those costs are allowable, that they can, and that they within our regulations and things of that nature. So some, not all, and it's also over time, right? So there's been programs to date where perhaps there were particular line items like equipment or recruitment of trainees, right? Where we've recouped funds back if they have not hit those particular targets, but the project's still been successful. So it's a wide range of activities, not solely just to say that a project failed and we recouped back $10 million. It's over a course of various activities.
Thank you.
Larry?
Yes, thank you, Maria. So Jennifer, that was an excellent presentation. I actually learned quite a bit in spite of having been floating around CIRM for many years. So that was great. The amount of money you guys are getting out the door in Prop 14 funds and the rate at which you're getting it out, it's very impressive. I do notice that you have 4 people in your entire department doing what looks like is going to be a mountain of work over the next few years in terms of management. Are you adequately staffed, and do you have what you need to get all that done? Because this is a crucial part of our operation.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So this board has been really active since January of 2021. We've increased the portfolio by 50%. Next year, we're expected to increase by another 50%. And so the portfolio is growing, as you noted. I would say we average about 80 awards per grants manager, and of that team, 3 individuals are really managing portfolio. So we are hiring at the current moment and have plans to hopefully bring on someone else in the next year. But it is something that we're constantly monitoring as the portfolio grows and as we expand to more programs. So I appreciate that question, because we are trying to get some more help for the team because the portfolio is growing at a rapid rate.
Great, thank you.
Marvin? Marvin, you're on mute.
Sorry. This is a suggestion maybe that builds on Isabel's suggestion, is if it's too difficult to make something a requirement for a proposal, some of the processes that I oversaw before, we gave additional points to some favored activity that we wanted to promote without making it a requirement. So that might be something to consider as the board considers Isabel's suggestion.
That's a great point. Thank you for that suggestion.
JT, that's all the hands.
My apologies, JT, if I could make a quick comment. It is because of my relationship with Marv, wanted to say that it is incredibly helpful to receive presentations like this, JT and members of the board, from a patient advocate perspective, as it helps me to understand and appreciate CIRM's prominence as a grant management organization. I also want to echo what Isabel constantly reminds me of, and I mean that in only the best way, that our responsibility to ensure that the underserved and unserved get represented in the trials that these grants are directed at. And again, this presentation helps me as a board member to be more effective. And so as in terms of CIRM being an exemplary, and again, I applaud lots of superlatives here, because I applaud this area of work, and hope, JT, that you and the next chair will be focused on making sure that every new board member gets this kind of onboarding and presentation as part of their initial orientation to this board. It's very helpful.
Thank you, Al. I think that largely behind Maria's decision to have Gil and Jen present as part of her president's report, because we do have so many new board members, and as I mentioned off the top, are now full up for first time in many, many years. So thank you for that, Al. Okay. Jen, thanks again. And I would believe Al used the word prominence as a grant-making institution. I would go one step further and use the word preeminence, because I don't know of any other operation that does it any better than we do. So that is directly a function of all members of the team. So thank you to everybody for making this happen. Okay, Maria, I believe that concludes the president's report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate the board's feedback. We will continue to provide updates during the president's report on these types of matters, as well as updates on our portfolio and activities in the organization. Thank you for allowing us that time.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Art for comments on the AAWG.
Yes, there's no real report to give other than that we're proceeding accordingly, working with the Department of Finance, and the governor's May revises on our budget and ability to distribute funds for our patient assistance fund that we clearly approved a few weeks ago. We're also now working, Sean, it's great to have Sean on board, and we're working very closely together as we move forward. So I think our next working group meeting will probably be in May, which we will have a much fuller report as activities emerge. Thanks.
Thank you, Art. Last but not least, I wanted to give a few comments as part of a chair's report. For those of you who are familiar with modern music these days, in many instances, you will have two performers. For example, you'll have a song by Drake featuring Rihanna. And so in the spirit of that, I wanted to give some comments on a topic and to prominently feature Isabel to flesh out the topics. I think it's something that will be of considerable interest to the board. So there were—
Oh, wait, is this your post-CIRM career record producer?
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Art.
But am I Drake or am I Rihanna?
Oh, you're Rihanna. I'm Drake. So I figured somebody would ask that question. So there were a lot of comments earlier today about diversified cell lines, the need to get more data for those from communities that are particularly underserved. And of course, all of the comments about our ongoing developing DEI policy and implementation. There was a very interesting thing that happened last week, which I don't know how many of you caught it, but a number of years ago in the mid-2010s, NIH embarked upon something called an All of Us study, the goal of which was to get 1 million people to donate blood or saliva to develop a set of 1 million whole genome sequences for use by the scientific community to do research on for various conditions. It was a bold program as it was designed. And last Thursday, the NIH released the whole genomic sequences of just under 100,000 of those participating. And normally, in the past, historically, genome sequencing has been really confined first and foremost to those of European descent, as much as 90% of that. And the goal here was to greatly diversify the communities that were involved in these genomic sequencings. And indeed, from the 90% figure, those that are what was just released and what will be the final result when all is said and done is that fully half of the genomic sequencings will be from communities of color, and those that have typically not been adequately or anywhere near adequately paid attention to in medical research. To date, they've had 470,000, give or take, who've agreed to participate towards their goal of 1 million, and 325,000 of those have now given blood or saliva towards the analysis in question. So this is a mega big data program that is dramatically altering the landscape for what will be available for scientists to analyze and develop precision targeted treatments for communities of every sort, every color, and is enormously valuable. So I just wanted to make the board aware of that, because it is what that project is so in keeping with everything that is fundamental to the mission of CIRM. Now, that's the end of the Drake part of the presentation. It just so happens that, perhaps not surprisingly, Isabel was asked to be a part of the All of Us study team a number of years ago, and has brought the same passion that she brings to what we do here at CIRM to what they're doing at All of Us. So I'd like to now turn it over to Isabel/Rihanna to tell us more about what she's been doing in that effort. So thank you, Isabel.
Thank you very much, JT. If I'd have known I was Rihanna, I would have dressed differently, but I wasn't given an advance notice. Thank you. And I have breaking news, because in fact I was late because we were getting our updated report, and so I can change your numbers just a little. But I do appreciate what you're referring to, JT, and yet, just like CIRM, All of Us is in a constant learning, evolving mode. And my joy and pleasure of being on the IRB, which I have been since its inception in 2016, has been, in fact, to lob a few balls that have changed the direction or the slowness in which the program was moving to improve its DEI score, if you will. So as of January 31st of this year, 459,933 had completed all primary consent, and almost 412,000 had also completed EHR consent. And of those, 75% are considered underrepresented individuals. But this includes racial and ethnic minorities, the rural, the disabled, including blind and other incapacitated individuals. So the total active enrollment sites is 216 different constructions of nonprofits, the large ones we mentioned, academic institutions, community, federally qualified healthcare centers. We have one participating from California. And they have made a great deal of difference with different methods of approach to make these 459,000 possible. We are now in the year 5 of this program, so we're halfway there. And if you recall, this was actually initiated by President Obama in his 2015 State of the Nation, in which he called for the implementation of this All of Us research program. And so I'll break down the numbers as we currently have them. Non-Hispanic white is 152,611. For Hispanic, it's almost 54,000. For African American, it's almost 66,000. For Asians, which we discussed again today about the low turnout and what do we do about that, is just short of 9,400. For American Indian and Alaska Native, it's just over 4,000, which we were considering very successful given the percentages they represent in the country, but there's also been some understandings with the tribal nations that have kind of controlled our ability to outreach more to this particular population. For a combination of bisexual, gay, and lesbian, it's almost over 20,000. Income-wise, it's also very interesting. Less than 10,000, over 51,000 participants. Between 10 and 25,000, it's almost 40,000 participants. Between 50 and 75K, it's about 31,000 participants. And with a reported income of over 200,000, it's about 18,000 participants. The largest groups of participants are between 45 and 74. At least 44,000 have reported a disability status, such as cognition, hearing, mobility, vision. They're in independent living, and between 1/3 and 2/3 identified as a racial ethnic group participant. So about 9,300 have withdrawn from the program since its start. There are a couple of things that I learned starting in this program and found out how powerful IRBs are. It's my understanding we can close down a program and stop it in its tracks. I never thought about it in those terms, but always in terms of how do we make the applicants better? How do we increase their engagement of community health, communities who are unrepresented? And how do we use that power actually to change the way IRB does business? I always said from the get-go that I wanted us to be the platinum model for what IRBs do and how they do it. So we have about 4 patient advocates amongst the 15 people on the IRB, which include academicians, researchers, bioethicists, bioinformaticians, geneticists, oncologists, and lawyers. Some of those represent 2 or 3 things, but it's been really important to have the patient advocates, but more importantly, and something I tell IRBs and other leadership, including you, JT, that it is very crucial for patient advocates to be able to feel that they can move their issues by finding allies amongst academicians and the scientific community who will in fact support what they're trying to get across, because it really builds, I think, the muscle of that patient advocate to believe they have something to say and that they can actually make impact. And in my very first day on the job, when the program leadership was talking about maybe in 1 year launching a Spanish language website, I told them I thought that was incorrect, that they needed to start work on that right away, that if they wanted to represent inclusion, that they needed to have that Spanish. It was a presentation issue, an image issue, as well as an inclusion issue. And thanks to the chair who helped support that proposal, they started working on it right away, and it was probably implemented within six months of that. The other thing that we did, which is something I drove here, and that is DEI. We required that all applicants had to provide a plan based on the demographic footprint of the area they served, the geographic and the demographics of the geographic footprint they served. They needed to provide metrics based on the demographics of who they would recruit and if they had the appropriate language speakers on board to support the project. The plans had to indicate the makeup of the CAB, the Community Advisory Board. They had to offer cultural competency training to their teams, And finally, what was their community engagement and outreach plan? And I think that that's been really crucial in our keeping their feet to the fire on this. And I've reviewed a lot of consortium reports and seen how they have, in their own learning process, recognized it is difficult, but it is necessary, and also been very important for their outreach to work with community. Here's a couple of ideas that are being considered, and one that I think is really crucial, because we keep getting asked, I keep getting asked by many, how do we get more communities of color into clinical trials? And one of the things I've heard here is that we accommodate participants in multiple different ways, including using mobile units, home visits, and convenient places such as libraries and community centers where Wi-Fi is available, in order to educate, inform, recruit, and consent, as well as for collections of biospecimens. So, and in fact, I think it was Larry's point, but not sure, where we allow participants to report their own physical measurements. They order saliva kits and connect to their electronic health records. And I agree that there was some concern on our board about how credible and valuable people doing their own reporting might be, but these are some of the thinkings. One other thing that I thought was really crucial is that they have added a module that collects social determinants of health. The task force that was charged with developing it defines social determinants of health as the conditions and context in which people are born, live, learn, play, work, and worship across the lifespan that influence health and quality of life. That was approved by us in June of 2021. It's optional. It's available to all participants. And as of January of 2022, 21% of all eligible participants had completed the survey. There are 6 components. About 19% were underrepresented groups, and about 5.4% were Spanish speaking. And finally, I'll share with you something that I found that I thought was very critical. And that was, and sorry about the phone, someone else trying to sell me something. As you mentioned, JT, being able for scientists to go in and actually register to utilize this data. And one of the things, and already 21 different research papers have been published based on some of what they have learned. And I found some of them kind of interesting in terms of the papers. Cardiovascular health disparities in racial and other underrepresented groups, antibodies to severe acute respiratory syndrome due to coronavirus 2 that they're looking at, healthcare access and utilization among adult cancer survivors, self-rated family history health knowledge among all of the participants, stroke disparities among non-racial minorities in the All of Us research program, and one other thing. Sorry, I'm trying to get down here. Increasing inclusivity in the precision medicine research, the views of deaf and hard of hearing individuals, which is one of the areas that we're trying to improve on ourselves. And to the last point about utilizing and accessing this data, early on, we started discussing about the possibility of the community being able to ask the research question, and therefore also being able to access the data. Now, it does require, first of all, you can only do this work in the cloud. You can't download it and take it home with you. You have to work within the parameters set up by all of us. So second of all, you have to meet certain very high level requirements in order to do this work. But they also did want to include citizen scientists and allow them to access and do their own work. And at the time I said, that's great. And I was at a training meeting with promotores, AKA community health workers, and telling them, you know, all of us is going to do this. We as community are going to be able to access this information. we're going to be able to ask our own questions that are important to the Latino community so that you can go out and talk to them about some of our issues. And so I said, citizen scientists. And the first thing is someone got up and said, do not call it citizen scientists, call it community scientists, because citizen scientists to us is exclusive. It leaves some of our community out based on a word. So we have to be careful about the narrative. So I went back and fought for the change just in the language from citizen scientist to community scientist. And so they have done that, but there's also a formal group calling themselves community scientists, but that doesn't bother me. The fact of the matter is that all of us has been sensitive to and acts on issues that they hadn't thought about. It is not their lived experience, but they're willing to be open to and make that change because they want to get to that million with President Obama's initiative in mind that it includes all of us. So that's my report for today. I hope that some of you found it very helpful and interesting.
Thanks very much, Isabel. And that's a great amplification on the details and the inner workings of what that group is doing, which is very, very important. And as we've been saying, is completely copacetic to what we're trying to do as well. So any comments or questions of Isabel with respect to her comments there? Maria, do you see any hands there?
No.
No. Okay.
Oh, can I make one last comment, JT?
Certainly.
For the comfort of those who would name me and for those who are new, a simple Isabel will do. I appreciate those adding the accent. Beto, I know sometimes it's a struggle, so Isabel will do.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the chair report. I think we're now to the public comment on any items of any interest. Maria, do you see any public comment?
I do not.
Okay, having said that, I of course would be remiss if I didn't say how happy I was that the baseball negotiations successfully concluded and we're going to have a season. Al, I'm sorry that Posey and Bryant are gone, Gil as well, but these things happen. So may the best team win when opening day comes in the next couple of weeks. And with that, thank you all for a very nice and informative meeting as always. Maria, our next full board meeting is?
Our next full board meeting is May 26th. We have an application review subcommittee meeting on April 19th for those of you that are part of that. And we are trying to get a June all board meeting scheduled. I know it's super last minute, but just given aggressive schedules with chair, vice chair search, as well as some other items, we're hoping to get a June meeting as well. So that's what we've got.
So thank you, and thank you, Maria. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Coley. Thank you, Stephanie, and to all of you who make this happen. We appreciate it. Mary Ann, with that, have a great rest of your